Well, what we're doing is we're looking at mythology from a spiritual point of view, the viewpoint of the mystery schools, and especially the modern Christian mysteries. We're trying to understand what is important in God, in the cosmos, so that we can harmonize with that and not be working against it all. We began about a year ago studying hierarchy, and we did that by looking at the character of divinity per se, and we did that by looking at Hindu mythology. And we looked at the chaotic, almost unhierarchical nature of Hindu mythology. Then we moved to Egyptian Egyptian mythology and looked at one of the most rigidly hierarchical of all mythologies. Now we're looking at Greek mythology, and in the Greek mythology we're going to study hierarchy from several points of view. Last time we looked at Plesiogean creation stories, or the creation according to the Plesiogean. We noted last time that the Plesiogean creation story was childlike and extremely feminine, and any internal structure was almost accidental to it. It is the in the shelf up to your right are some fresh glasses. It's not right there, straight ahead. The Plesiogeans were the pre-Dorian and pre-Aryan Greeks. They were there before what we would call the modern Greeks. Yes, that was their name. This time, we're going to do something very different. We're going to look at a different creation story. It's going to take us this time and next time to get through it. And this is just the opposite of what the Plesiogean was like. The Plesiogean was very feminine. This is very masculine, because the mystery schools in general tend to be very masculine in nature. The mystery schools are peopled by children of fire as opposed to children of water. And the mystery schools do not do so much things by feeling as they do by thinking. They do not do things as much by acceptance as they do by will. And so we're going to now look at the Orphic creation story, but this is from an uncopyrighted book, so it's a legal copying, and it's what we're going to be working on for tonight and the next meeting 2 weeks from tonight. It's very profound. It is extremely deep and extremely, as we just said, masculine. This chart is from a book entitled Orpheus, and this is the chart of Orphic theogony. The book is by G.R.S. Mead. And G.R.S. Mead is a splendid both scholar and spiritual seeker himself. He was praised to the sky by giants that he was associated with at various times in his life. As a young man, he was close to Madame Blavatsky, and she thought extremely highly of him. As an old man, he was praised very highly by Rudolf Steiner. And I don't know how the man could possibly have dug into as many sources as he dug into. Now, this book is, this chart is his own making, and it is from the, taken from the work called the Theology of Plato. Which in itself, Orpheus, as the original Orpheus, not the mythical Orpheus, but the original Orpheus sang poetic hymns. And those poetic hymns were profound in the inner esoteric meanings that they carried. Not only that, but Orpheus was capable of transmitting the profundities in these enigmatic poems to the hearers. And some of the greatest lights in Western spiritual philosophy have immediately and directly been influenced by Orpheus. The two most famous are Pythagoras first and Plato later. But there were Pythagoreans and years later Neo-Pythagoreans, and there were Platonists then and later on Neoplatonists and still later on other Neoplatonists. The most famous Neoplatonists were the ones in Alexandria of Egypt, where the great library was, that had all of the esoteric books that either got burned or ended up in the hands of the Arabs out in the deserts. And that branch was begun by Ammonius Saccas, and it had such great lights in it as Plotinus and Porphyry, and who else? The one who wrote on the myths of the Chaldeans. I forget his name. On the other hand, in Athens, the school of Plato, the academy, continued on for centuries after the passing of Plato. And several centuries A.D., Proclus held the chair of Plato. He held it one generation after it was held by Plutarch. Now, Proclus has probably for me one of the most inspiring spiritual lives. He was an extremely wealthy man, but he derived no benefit from his wealth. He dedicated himself to being a scholar, and like all of the Neoplatonists, whether in Athens or in Alexandria, they lived very, very simple lives. So sometimes they lived on just about nothing but oatmeal or something like that, oatmeal and water. And Proclus did that. With all of his wealth, he studied ways to help poor people to become more self-reliant, whereas he lived a life of prayer and of study. He himself wrote Orphic hymns, but he wrote many of the famous commentaries like the Scholia and such like that on various things of Plato and other mystery topics. He wrote one of the only great commentaries on the astronomy and astrology of Ptolemy. But he was a most beautiful, beautiful man. The theology of Plato is what we're going to be talking about the theogony. And it's really unfair to speak of it as belonging to Plato or even belonging to Orpheus, because it really belongs to God collectively. And so what we're talking about is that. Now, this is a very beautiful thing. We're going to be talking about this on the level of the solar logos. That is, when most people speak of the word God, they speak of the being that is the center of our solar cosmos. And it is the source, the direction, the end, and the relevance of all of our life, of all of our evolution. This same kind of hierarchical structure that's in this rather complicated chart could be used in a sliding scale and be looked at in a much more, much greater sense, to the highest of all levels within the supreme being, within the absolute. But I choose not to do that because that gets too far away from anything we could possibly experience at all. The relevance is what is important. I find myself, when I read books about people talking about intergalactic masters and things like that, I find myself being turned off by them because they really don't have anything to say. They don't have anything to say that I can experience. The idea is that it doesn't make any difference. This is the beauty of hierarchy. And if you think about it, if you work on centering, that is, if you turn inward in prayer or in worship or in concentration and almost any other kind of activity, you center. And whether you're centering to God as the center of the solar system or God as the center of the whole business, it doesn't make any difference. When you center, and it all winds up anyway. It doesn't make any difference how you want to look at it. It brings out a principle, and that principle is, since we're trying to look at hierarchy, what is more important, what is less important, and what are the relationships of the different parts of cosmos to each other. If a hierarchy is just, if it is true, if it is proportionate within itself, it always applies on a sliding scale. That is, if we only look within ourselves and find what is truly most important within ourselves, it'll apply on the level of the solar logos or of the cosmic logos altogether. So it has to do with the whole conception of a formation. You can make a geometric formation, and different people, like out front here, we have conversations all the time, and that formation may change. It might be different people at different times sitting in the same chairs relative to each other, but that doesn't change the formation. And the same thing is true of hierarchy. If you understand the underlying principles and the underlying structure of cosmos, the changes in formation don't make any difference. It's all based on the principle of analogy. Since it is the same one being that underlies everything, it is the same one being that analogously is to be found on all levels. I'm even sounding like I am mildly ill. Now, one of the ways that the Orphic theogony is masculine, in that it is almost pure theogony and no cosmogony, meaning to say it has to do only with the divine creative beings and not so much with the worlds. It's not at all materialistic. It's not at all form-oriented. It's oriented toward what does the being. And that is a value that is very strong throughout the Orphics. It is the beings and not the stuff that they work with. Okay. If we look at the chart of theogony, we're only going to get very little way into it tonight because this little chart is one of the heaviest things I've ever run into in my life. If we look at the very top of the chart, there is the ineffable. And the ineffable is figured as both a point and as a circle. The ineffable relates to the absolute. We have related to the ineffable many times, or to the absolute many times, in two ways. One being complete darkness, the other being complete silence. Because only in silence can there be that much pact, or can there be that much sound. And one really can't speak about something that is absolute. I won't go too much into that, but when one focuses, one always focuses on that dark center. Whether it is the dark center of the silent watcher in the middle of, I should say, at the root of the nose, or whether it is at the center of the earth, which would be the center of gravity, or whether it is at the center of the solar system, or whether it is at the center of the galaxy, or is it when it's at the center of the whole business. There is everything, all creation begins with a connection with the ineffable or with the absolute. On all levels, it always begins with the that which is almost beyond knowing. This is a very beautiful thing because on this level, relative to the becoming, relative to the unknown, all of us are absolutely equal. There is, on the deepest level of spirit, an absolute democracy. Each of us, when we turn inward and look into that center of darkness in ourselves, are no different whatsoever than God or the Supreme Being. There is democracy on the deepest level of spirit. Now, in terms of manifestation, it's clear that the Supreme Being and God of our solar system are quite beyond us. But in the process of first-hand experience of what we are in, we are all very, very equal. We've always spoken of it as silence. Orphics say it's something that is ineffable. Now, it's both a point and a circle. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. It doesn't make any difference. It's only an attribute of manifestation and spatial extensive manifestation in the first place that we even can think of a circle as being a gigantic point. But from the viewpoint of the contact with the Spirit, it doesn't make any difference. When you're centering, and almost the center is itself invisible in its darkness. Now, we have referred to it as blackness. Now, if you look underneath the circle, it is called the thrice unknown darkness. When we were talking about Hathor in the Egyptian mythology, we had a sidelight there. I asked Dan to look something up about the thrice unknown darkness, and that is our relationship to the Absolute is one of thrice unknown darkness. But this says more about the nature of spirit and manifest being than it says about the Absolute itself. As we've said right from the very beginning, we won't invent the triangle all over again, but 3 is the simplest number where we can reach an objectivity. And the 3 attributes, so to speak, of simple, pure, singular being, or beingness, is represents the 3 points of view, or the 3 powers that we have to know anything. And so when it says that it is thrice unknown, it's saying that it is beyond any and all of the 3 characteristic ways that we have of knowing at all. This is to say, when we deal with the unknown, the awesome unknown, or the experiential unknown, we're always dealing with it in terms of the known. Not only the 3 attributes, but simple things in everyday experience. If we find something completely new, an experience we've never had before, we always refer it back to something that we know, rather than taking it as itself. And so that's always what happens, is like it is our history of being, or our history of knowing, that helps us to come to relate to the unknown. I think I've mentioned before my difficulties in trying to describe to somebody, someone who had never eaten a mango, what eating a mango was like. And the only thing I could do was relate it to peaches, which the other person and I both knew, which did great injustice to both mangoes and peaches. But, that's the way it goes. All right. Now, the thrice unknown darkness leads directly to a concept that we've also been dealing with for the last several years. Everything that is in manifest being that comes from the ineffable, or beyond the unknown darkness, the clouds of unknowing, is done by reflection. That because everything in creation is incomplete relative to that which is absolute, everything that is in being is a reflection of that most profound absolute state. And so when we have all the way from the very, very beginning, it is only a reflection. Now we're talking about a light that is, I don't even know that I can really even talk about it. But the strongest light of divine intellect, which goes beyond any kind of experience we've ever had. If we think of the experience that we have when we understand the truth of something, the lights turn on. But they're not lights like these lights. They are an inner light, and they are an inner light of intelligence. If we take that light and see it purely in itself, that light on the level of Christ consciousness, which is the light of truth that is within all ideas, that is not nearly as bright as the light of the Father, which to us appears to be darkness. All of that light of intelligence is only a reflection of that which is ineffable. And it's like saying that light is incomplete. And in a way, since everything that is incomplete would be totally swallowed up by that which is incomplete, which is complete, when that which is in part shall be done away, this is a much higher level of that. You might even say that light protects us from the absolute state of being non-being. So it's really, we're talking about something very, very profound. Now, if you think about it, there is much more subtlety in darkness than there is in light. We're not talking about a darkness here that is a darkness of complete ignorance, but in the experience of light, there is the experience of knowing. And in that experience of knowing, there is a comfort. There is a feeling of protection, a feeling of everything is all right. And in that there is illumination, and illumination illumines things and itself. But in darkness, it's much more subtle than that. It isn't clearly known. And there's something in that goes beyond the feeling of something being known. It's something that goes into the realm of something like a spiritual curiosity, something that draws us on. And anything could be in darkness. And that kind of experience is what the clouds of darkness or the thrice unknown darkness represented to the Orphics. It represented something extremely, extremely subtle, and it is as though there's an analogy that it's like. It's as though there's a sun out there, but there is something obscuring that sun, and if you put a mirror down, in that mirror you can see that light that is beyond the cloud that is obscuring it. And so all of our creation is a reflection. The mirror can't pick up all of the light that is there, but enough for it to become manifest. And this is the kind of experience that the Greeks were speaking of, the Orphics were speaking of. Obviously, the clouds of unknowing, the thrice unknown darkness, are the highest level when it gets on the level of the Supreme Being or even of our solar deity. They are what is ripped off in the entheastic orgies that we spoke of a few years ago. When they talk about Orpheus having his limbs ripped off, or the dancers pulling off the attributes of his being so that he could experience directly. Okay, this is also very clearly the thrice unknown darkness is the veil of Isis. This is an Egyptian term after all. And the veil of Isis means that relative to the, I'm going to put this in very down-to-earth human terms, relative to the insecure, macho, manifest nature of spirit, which is very incomplete and weak, the absolute is seen as feminine, and therefore the clouds covering it, the seven veils of Salome, if you like, that cover it, represent something that covers the feminine, which is absolute and total in itself, because it can create without a male. After all, when we looked last week, we saw that Eurymedon created the masculine snake. She didn't need anything beyond herself. In almost all species of animals and trees, the female is all that is needed for creation. All right, I don't want to get into that. The first reflection which is almost acausal in nature, is the enigmatic, unchanging time. And sometimes it is given a name, though the Orphics would never think of giving it a name. Something at this level of being is never named. It has been called by others aeon, A-E-O-N. And this is where our word eternity comes from. And it is, as an unaging or unchanging time, it is a timeless time. Now, this is a very interesting conception. In the first place, it indicates that the Orphics, like all of the mystery schools, claim that when you go up the ladder of hierarchy into the realms of spirit, you are going into the potential that is time. Whereas when you go down the ladder more in the direction of matter, you are going into that quality which is space. And so at the very top of the ladder, the potential that stands between the thrice unknown darkness and the beginnings of manifestation is an unaging time. Now there's a way that we can get a little bit of an idea of this unaging time by taking a conception of physics. Physics has a quality of the absolute all in itself. They think of it in terms of the primordial atom before the Big Bang. And as far as they're concerned, everything that is in the cosmos could fit into one point. All of the matter that makes all of the galaxies before the Big Bang took place in one point. This idea is also seen in a physics conception which, though materialistic and only one planar, single planar or monoplanar, does have some interesting analogies to it. And that is the concept of absolute zero. Remember, in physics, everything goes from a higher state of energy to a lower state of energy. And that the higher the state of energy it is, the more expanded it is. So that if you make things colder and colder and colder, they shrink and they move less until at absolute zero there would be no gases, there would be no liquids, there would be no energy. Everything would be frozen into one tiny little lump, which would even be a lump. It would be like a point. And this is the concept of the absolute again, at absolute zero, where there is absolute motionlessness. And from the viewpoint of matter, that is, from the viewpoint of matter end of the pole, or the space end of the pole, everything would indeed be that compacted. But there is another kind of compaction where everything moves faster and faster and faster until there is absolute motion, and then in a much different way, with ultimately subtle stuff, it is moving so fast that it is solid being. You know what I'm trying to say? So when you get to the quality of aeon or eternity, that it is absolutely fast and absolutely slow at the same time. See, when you're talking about something absolute, you're talking about the ineffable. And you run into all kinds of contradictions immediately, that something is both absolutely fast and absolutely slow at the same time, and it becomes almost nonsensical, and that's why it's ineffable. The claim is that we can reflectively begin to experience that, and any time we undergo any kind of creative thing, even thinking about a quicker way to do our laundry, we're connecting with that in the absolute focus that we have within ourselves. The first complete reflection is the dotted triangle. And I say by complete meaning that it has a quality of objectivity to it. And that is called the primordial triad. It's the first thing that stands in a place of being, as the Orphics would say, intelligible, but it's so close to absolute being that it is itself enshrouded in a character of ineffability and a character of totality of being that we can only reflect on it. And that's why it is pictured as a dotted triangle, and it is the all in all put together and not put together at the same time. This primordial triangle is called the unmanifestable. It has the quality of being and existence, but it is a substitute for the unmanifest state of being. So it is so subtle that it can hardly be spoken of. One can point in its direction, but it's the only thing that can represent or be a deputy or to be substitute for the absolute. This gets to a principle that we've mentioned before, and I don't mind repeating because these are repeating things that should pervade our life, and that is the more powerful something is, the more subtle it is. That kinetic energy seems to have great force to it, but it's nothing compared to the mind, because the mind can even smash the atoms that are involved in kinetic energy. And when we take that then and think of the power of the Spirit, and then that which transcends Spirit, that subtlety is so ultimately powerful and so close to unchangeability that it is through that all things are made possible. And this is something that goes to a principle that Shakespeare uses a lot. And it's used a lot in drama. Always when there is a powerful experience, the most powerful of all experiences, Shakespeare never does on stage. He never does them on stage. But he has someone describe in deputy what has taken place. And then it's up to your imagination for what is being described to you, or reflectedly or second-handedly given to you, is so much more powerful because you're entering into it in terms of the imagination reliving or producing that experience in your own way. Now this gets into it's just a little sideline trip, but it gets into something that is extremely, extremely important. And that is that the deputy, or the substitute, or the scapegoat is powerful because of being in that position. That the one reporter seeing something that's happening in Somalia, or seeing something that's happening in China, becomes far more powerful because that person is a deputy or is your source of reflection. And this is a principle that the Orphics understood above all other mystery schools. And, well, probably the Christians should know it, with Christ being a deputy for the power that is God. But the whole idea of reflectively seeing something rather than seeing it directly, it has much, much more force. Because when you're seeing it reflectively and recreating it, you are in effect putting yourself behind your own clouds of darkness, behind your own Isis nature, your own shrouding or veiling, and then you yourself become part of that whole power. So it's a really if you put out substitutes, it's alright. I don't want to say anything more. We're going to look at the all-one-many, the all-in-one. We're going to look at that in its further reflections in just a little bit. But the primordial triad is composed of the universal good. And the universal good was called super-essential, meaning to say that the universal good was beyond even the essence of being. Meaning to say this is what had given up so much of its own nature that it could represent the closest contact with the ineffable, and therefore it was even beyond the quality of essence. Then there was the universal soul. Soul in the sense of that which gives character to being. And then there is the universal mind, that is which is capable of imparting or impartable. But mind you now, both of these stand in a way beyond manifestation, and they are themselves sort of the mirror that does the reflecting beyond the thrice unknown darkness. Oh boy. The nature of the primordial triad, you might say, is something that is archetypally inspiring to the beings that create or manifest archetypes. So the source of archetypes looks to the primordial as something para-archetypal to itself. I don't know how to put it any other way, because when it sounds almost like gibberish, and it probably will be such to us for a long time until we really begin to have true spiritual experiences that are very, very transcendent beyond thoughts. What we're doing here is looking at this within thought. Now, this super-archetypal character of the primordial triad is superimposed on the triads of extreme existence and creation. And that is true even in our own experience. Like we have sort of a central seed principle that is the focus for our ability to think thoughts at all. And that, called the seed atom of the mind, or the seed center of thinking, is superimposed or superimposes itself on our own individual personal focus with the absolute. So that if somebody looks at you with the height of seership, they find at the root of the nose in your forehead a point of darkness that is no different than the Supreme Being looking into the deepest nature of itself and seeing a point of darkness from which all else issues. That each one of us has that same superimposition of a primordial thinking mechanism that allows all of our being, spiritual and material, to come into existence through a center. It's pretty far out, I know. All right. We haven't even gotten to something. I tell you, the arctics are very, very far out. All right. The primordial triad deals with a state that you might say is para-existential. It's beyond an existential state. Now, let's move down the line and begin to talk about things that we can speak of. The manifest transcendent. Everything that is in the left-hand part of the chart, below the primordial dotted triangle, to the dark line at the very bottom, is called the manifest transcendent, which we in modern language would call the realms of pure spirit. The Orphics call this the supersensible world, which is probably the best term that could be given to it. But unfortunately, Rudolf Steiner uses the word, and he uses it in a very different way. Rudolf Steiner uses it to mean anything that cannot be seen with any of the physical senses is supersensible. So that even the desire world or the etheric world is what he means by supersensible. The Greeks mean something much deeper. They mean that which goes beyond concrete thinking. Always beyond this kind of super deep thing. We can't stay there all the time. It would burn us out. Now, what is on the second page is called the sensible world. And the only things that are on there are the things that come down as far as the etheric realm. The most sensible world, the one that we live in, isn't even listed because we are the only gods, and this has to do with the birth of the gods. This is not talking about worlds, mind you. This is talking about the beings that manifest these worlds and manifest in these worlds. Now, what we're going to look at is very deep and very profound, as you can hear already as we've been talking. It's almost too much. That may even be why I'm feeling ill in these last few days, because I'm talking in a rather dry, unfeeling voice about something that is so holy and something that is so profound that human beings, especially human beings as profane as I am, almost have no right to speak of such things. And you're almost asking, by bringing in things of that great of power and of that great of holiness, bringing it into your life is almost asking for trouble, because it's so powerful that it's bound to try to eject all of the profane in you or to burn it up into spirit, and that's exactly what the whole idea is. Now, since this is spiritual, it is triadic, and we're not going to go back and reinvent the triangle because we've done that so many times before, and this whole chart is filled with triangles. We're going to look at some of the complexities. We're only going to get a little ways into this tonight, because you can see that even getting to the realms of spirit has taken us quite a while. It's taken us 45 minutes. There are 3 triangles, or 3 triads. The highest being called the noetic, the second being called the noetic and noeric, and the third being called the noeric. Respectively, they are, the noetic triangle is intelligible. And by the word intelligible means capable of being conceived or conceiving intelligence. So the nature of the intelligible is so high that, and it seems almost so passive or so unmoving, that it seems that we can conceive it with intelligence, but it in itself is, and it is intelligible, meaning that it has light, so to speak, spiritual light, and the spiritual light that is so bright that it is as darkness, as we've said before. Because the higher up we go, the closer we get to that ineffable state. Pythagoras was once asked, I think I mentioned this last night, for a definition of God, and Pythagoras said, I don't believe that that one can define God. But if one were to define God, it would the body of that being would be light, and the soul would be truth. And when you think of the word intelligibility, you're thinking of truth with a capital T. The second triad is both noetic and noeric. And the third triad is noeric, which means it is of intelligence. The second triad of beings, or of being, is both intelligible and intelligent, whereas the third one is merely intelligent. That is capable of understanding, conceiving, or of knowing. But the truth that is known is reserved only for the noeric triad. Now, it is all right to use the modern Western conceptions for each of these triads, and they make sense perfectly. However, we're going to look at the Orphic, because that's what we're looking at, is Orphic hierarchy, and it really gives insights into the nature of spirit, the very stuff of our being that is us. So the noetic, noeric, and the noeric are the same thing as our concept of it's divine. Divine spirit, life spirit, human spirit. Will, love, wisdom, activity. Or Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or Father, Mother, Son, will, imagination, conception, or if you like, idea, or willing, feeling, thinking, or power, word, logos, motion, or creation, preservation, destruction. Truth. Yes, I am weaker than I thought I was. All the writing goes downhill. Okay, we won't go into those terms. We've all studied them for years because we're looking at things, we're looking at the Orphic creation. And therefore, let's use the Orphic way of looking at them. And I find the Orphic way very, very helpful to me, very uplifting and understandable by me. All right? Now, each of these beings, each of these triads, is a window to a reflection to the reality of the ineffable. The reflection being the primordial triad. So these are each like a lens or a window to that reflection to the higher reality, which is why and you see that the only one that it's really given in is in the noetic triangle, in the little diagram we have, the being that is the vestibule of the good. Now, if we look at this, and the universal good is in the primordial triad, but the window or the vestibule is the noetic triad. Now, this is really, really very interesting, and I think that it's a most useful of all of the things we're going to talk about tonight, because it's something that we can apply in our daily lives. This is saying that of manifest spirit, the noetic is the vestibule of the good. It is the manifest window to the reflection of the ineffable in terms of goodness. And this says that the highest quality of the divine, whether we're speaking of it on the level of the solar being or of the supreme being, is goodness. Which means, then, about the deepest thing we can do in our worship or in our adoration is to see the good. And adoration is a praise of the good, or just the statement of it to the good. And since this is the ultimate source of creation, in the creation-preservation triad, it is appreciation is the source of creation. If you look in any creation myth, most especially the one that we grew up with, and that is the Judeo-Christian Bible, if you look into the books of Genesis and look at the creation, the creative beings at every stage of their creation, the way they finalize it is by looking back and saying, it is good. And so anytime we praise something or find the good in something, we are drawing on the deepest part of our being, because that affirmation or praising of the good is an assertion of the will, and it is the deepest statement of the nature of the divine. We are saying that it is by seeing the goodness in it. In fact, the way that we can help people more than any other way, not doing it flatterously, but just finding the good, seeing the good. We don't even have to say anything sometimes. Just to see the good is extremely, extremely powerful action. We can't do much more than that. I don't know of a person in the world that doesn't want to be appreciated. And if a person is appreciated, it in effect really does lift and raise them up to the divine level. Now, here, we're only going to get part of the way with this tonight. We're only going to get to because the noetic triad is broken up into three, as we would expect the triad. But even each of the three of the triad are broken up into three, and we won't get that far tonight. We'll have to finish that next time. And they're looked at in different ways. They're looked at by the bound, the infinite, or infinity, and the all, or the mixed. This is the one, this is the many, and this is the all. Now mind you, this is of being and beings within what we would call the divine spirit. That these are the beings that have to do with the creation of the cosmos that we live in. All right? By bound, it is meant one. It is being at one with oneself so totally that there isn't anything but oneself. However, there isn't even self. It is one with one. And as a consequence, it is bound. And that one with one, since it is so unified, from our point of view, it's intelligible as one, but you can't say anything about it. Because to say anything about it is to detract from its oneness. And so, in effect, the highest being in the creation is so much one with one that it is, in effect, ineffable. And so the ineffability is carried through this being from the reflection into a complete unity. This is extremely like what the mystic Meister Eckhart said. God is enjoying himself. But even the enjoyment, I don't know how to say it, even the enjoyment puts it in into a sentence rather than just a period. We're talking about something. So it's as if to say there is no higher spiritual state that we can approach in ourselves than the enjoyment we have in ourselves in creation. If we are inwardly creative, we are focused deep within ourselves in such a way that all else is lost. And since there is not even any self in it, there is an amazing spiritual indifference. It's as if to say, very much like the Bible says, God is not a respecter of persons. That it is so much at one with one in the creative act that is completely indifferent to the effect of that. Plato described this saying, that which subsists, mind you the word subsists, without distinction, the simplicity of the noetic triangle. That which subsists without distinction. It is the simplicity of the noetic triangle. This is called hyparxis. Again, we run into that state this is like saying it's beyond power. Because it doesn't even care about whether it has power. This is the meaning here is the rulership of rulership, the power of power, and we have a quality that only someone who is supremely indifferent to any distinction is capable of holding the highest power. This has led to a lot of fascism, of course. People misunderstanding this principle, trying to personalize it, but this that's something very, very. This is also referred to, as you see in the chart, it's referred to as what I would call the fatherness of the Father. Which would have to do with the indirect again being more powerful. All right, let's move down a little bit to infinity, power, or the mother, the motherness of the Father. This is all within the Father. When we see ourselves for what we are, or when we see what is, it always seems as though there's something more. This is effectually a poor man's analogy of what it looks like from the bottom up of the one becoming many. When you have two, you have pluralization. Within aeon, that unchanging time, or that ageless time, if one is appreciating one, there is in that concentration something like an emanation. And so the second was always, the triad for the Greeks, instead of being creation, preservation, destruction, but this is on a much higher level. It was creation, emanation, fabrication. We are fabricators in this. What we're talking about is the emanatory character of creation. And I don't know if I'm getting the idea across. any time one turns inward and all there is inward, the effect of that from the outside is an emanation. If you're around somebody who is praying and somebody who is praying powerfully, there is a radiance that's coming out even though the person is not trying to output. They're turning in, and that turning in has the effect of a radiance going outward. And paying attention, the one paying attention to the one, or the one wanting the one, seems to have the character of being more over even that almost changeless time. And therefore, the one is not seen merely as a point, but as that point expanded. Because if you think about it, the sun is as big as the universe. Because the sun is throwing out photons in every direction, and it is giving an image of itself throughout the entire cosmos. They're all going in the same direction, with the same, they're all being thrown out, all the particles of light are being thrown out, speaking in physics sense now, with the same shape that the sun is. And so that the sun is expanding to the extent of the entire cosmos. But the sun is not aware of that, because from the sun's point of view, the sun is sunning. It's not even aware that it's shining. And that quality of the one being many, and the many is from our point of view. Because if the sun expands out to the size of the universe, and you're at some other point in the universe, it looks like there are many points in there. You see what I'm trying to say? It's that it's capable of many points rather than just being, if it were all in one little tiny point. From the viewpoint of the bound, it's still one point. From the viewpoint of the many, it is a replication. And we are well below the many, and we're seeing that as the capability of the many. And that ability to grow or to foster in that way is called the motherness of the Father, and it's called the power. Because in the fatherness of the Father, it doesn't care about the power. It's just being. But when something is effected, even in only appearance, that is seen as power. It's much different in our conception of power as potential that we get from physics. This is a conception of power where power is what does or appears to do the multiplication to the many. So it is the point become the circle. And mind you, we're still very close to the ineffable yet, and that's why the ineffable is in this drawing made with both point and circle. So this is truthing truth, statically, or being, and this being, well, this sounds almost like gibberish, has the capability of having a character to it. And so it is, if the being just is, there's not character to it. It's so simple and so unified, there's no character. But if being is being, and it has that emanatory quality about it, it then has the quality of a character about it. And that is where the term universal soul comes from. It is a reflection of the universal soul in the primordial triad. From our point of view, the character of the noetic triangle is power. But again, this is power that is by influence, because it's the reflection or the manifest reflection, with the reflecting agency being the primordial triad. And if it's influence, that influence is like an emanation. And that emanation has the capability of being anything. And so it is the quality of the para principle of pure imagination. Pure imagination we'll talk about next time. So when we looked last time at that very simple little story with Urinom being the feminine and having all of the power of even bringing the serpent into existence, that fertilized her, the Greek conception of power was all right in there. So what we're doing here is we're talking about consciousness in the superlative, even in the case of the ineffable. Now, when consciousness is conscious of its character, though not necessarily self-conscious, made so distinct that it's self-conscious, but it's just conscious of character within the being of being, that is where the all comes into being. So we're now looking at the third, the mixed, which is that pure being and that pure being multiplied in power, and then being aware of the character of that multiplication is where the all, which is aware of both the power and the character. And so it is called the all because it has both the one and the many. But it's not a self-consciousness yet. This is like a super-conscious all-consciousness. And this is where everything that the triadic consciousness that the Greeks used, especially the Orphics, they described the whole universe by the point, the circle, and the line. And when there was a consciousness of the point expanded to the circle, that means you could have the lines of radii or the lines of diameters. When you had the point, the circle, and the line, you had within these three, you had the instruments to create anything else. Because the point, the circle, the point can either be expanded into the circle, or it can be delineated into the line. And if you take the point and the line and connect them, you produce the device whereby the circle is produced with the consciousness. That is the compass. And all of geometry, all of the cosmos, everything that is in the world can be measured with a compass and a straight edge. When you have the point in the circle, you in effect have a triangle. That the radius that the compass makes is a triangle. And so that this is the completing of a triad in the simplest of instruments that we use to produce geometric things, whereby everything can be proven through the whole hierarchy of geometry, everything that happens in our consciousness. The Orphics used both geometry and number, arithmetic, to understand the entire cosmos. It is from this that, we won't have time to go into it now, but it is from this that all of music originated, all of the harmonics. From this, all form originated, all sense of proportion originated from geometry. So they reduced to something that we're coming up to in just a few minutes. They reduced the entire cosmos as much as possible to the simple essentials. And they took complex forms like of human bodies or of trees or of animals, and they understood them in terms of the basic geometry, because if you can understand the basic geometric figures, point, line, and circle, which means triangles, squares, and everything else that can be derived from them, if you understand those simple geometric figures, the compounding of them helps you to understand any figure that is in the world. I've got books on the shelves here that show that even in the heart of the structure of where so-called electrons and protons appear in atoms in the shell theory, we're going to get to this next year probably, we're not going to get it to this year, that these things are found in geometric relationships to each other. And the way all of the stuff that we have here, anything that is a solid is a crystal. And all the crystals are based on close-packed structures, which are based on, again, the triangle, the square, and the pentagon. And everything in the cosmos, even the way the crystals fall out, are based on these same simple geometric ideas. And what we're talking about here is the most elementary lesson in basic geometry, or basic arithmetic, whether it is 1, 2, 3, meaning one too many, or whether it is point, line, and circle. We are at the very beginning of the beginning. However, when we looking at point, line, and circle, or 1, 2, 3, we're looking at things on such childish levels that the way we can see tonight, even from this vague attempt of trying to understand what the noetic triad is like, it is something very, very profoundly deep. In fact, the Orphics would go so far as to say that this can't really be taught. It can't really be communicated, and ordinary people can't really experience this. That the only way is if you have that profound experience of seership where all of the illusions are ripped off of you, all of the prejudices are ripped off of you, and even a lot of the attributes that we understand, the things in the world like the creation of our mind and such like that, when those things are ripped away from you in what they call the entheastic orgy, then you can come to unity with that, with this that we're speaking of. And when you confront this face to face and you are at one with this, and you can come back to this kind of realm again, then only do you really have the right to speak about this. So we're being a little bit cheeky in trying to do that. So there is a quality that is in this self-knowing, or I should say, this awareness of the character of being within being, which isn't really the same thing as knowledge, but it is para-knowledge, and it is para-intellect. This is the sonness of the Father in the noetic triangle. It becomes the characteristic of being, not the character. This brings us to the last little thing that we're going to say about any of this tonight, is that we can see from all of this one very simple thing, that for the Orphics, that everything is founded in simplicity. Simplicity and unity that is so great that it cannot be even really understood by the intellect. It can only be pointed at. And this is the quality of hierarchy, according to the Orphics and to anyone else, that simplicity and unity have to underlie or be at the pinnacle of any hierarchy of values. It is only unity that can sustain complexity. Anyone who sets out to study astrology or study psychology or study anything in the world by getting more and more complex is making a foolish error. That to look at all of the minutiae and hope to come to the understanding of something that is important is doomed for failure. Only to the extent that one can maintain a focus in the very primal simplicity, the very central unity that goes within and pervades the all, the many, and the one itself, only that is capable of sustaining a hierarchy. So this is an expansion on what we learned from the Greek principle of hierarchy, from the Egyptians, I mean. The Egyptians had a very strong hierarchy because they always kept their eye on the top. Now from the Greeks, what we learn is that in our values, what has to be at the top, fundamentally by the nature of existence, has to be the simplest and the most unified, and so simple and unified that it is unarguable, and that its position in hierarchy sustains all the differences and differentiations of anything else that comes in existence. And without that irrefragable unity, any other kind of difference is going to shatter, and you're going to have chaos, which is what we learned from the Hindu, because there were rivalries between Shiv and rivalries between Vishnu by the Vaisvas and I forget how to pronounce the word for the Shivites. They never did have a top central being. And because Brahma was in effect philosophically or religiously castrated, there was no one central principle. All right. Next time what we will do is we will talk about the triads of the triad of the noetic triad, that is ether, chaos, and the egg itself, and the divine dragon of wisdom, Phanes, Epicapus, and Metis, and then we'll talk about the noetic triad, and then the noeric triad, and that we will go no further than that. And we'll get that all done next time. And then we will go into something that's going to be exceedingly big and exceedingly exciting. We're only going to do part of that, and we're going to come back to it several years later if you're interested in that. I'll tell you what we're going to do. After we're done with the Orphic creation, the theogony, we're going to look at the Olympian creation from the poetry of Hesiod, which we mentioned last time. But the poetry of Hesiod has this gigantic hierarchy that relates all the gods and even right down to human beings. And you can find your way back up through the hierarchy to your parent star and through all of the principles back up to the one. And we're going to just only do from the top down a little bit. But someday I would like to come back and tell all of the Greek myths and relate them all back to the one and show how all of the stories and everybody's all related back together again using the conceptions of Orphic mythology, because they show how this kind of consciousness blended with this kind of consciousness produces this. And so it's a wonderful psychological study as well as a mythological study, and I hope someday to be able to do that, but I don't know. I have many ambitions because I can see that I'm never going to get hierarchy done this year. It's going to have to be sometime next year if I'm given that opportunity at all. And there are a lot of other things I want to do. I want to talk about the mythology of mythography, where the different worlds are, and the underworlds and things like that. And I want to look at some other topics. I would like to look at all of the mythologies of the origin of evil, right now we can see where good comes from, but no one knows where evil comes from. We're going to hint at that a little bit next time. But I'd like to look into the mythology of evil, but maybe those are things that could be done by looking at tying all of the stories together. And I do want to spend about 3 or 4 years looking at Christianity, esoteric, exoteric, orthodox, and all of that. And I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to do all of these things. I may just have to set mythology aside in favor of looking at Christianity, because I'm getting old enough and responsible enough that I can start taking on topics like that. Yeah, it's fun stuff. The Orphics, you can see why Dan is so utterly fascinated with Neoplatonism. It's quite an interesting thing. I have no idea. Yeah, Earl might know more than I do. So 2 weeks, what? It wasn't that Tuesday night? Oh, okay. So 2 weeks from tonight we'll finish.